Hello everyone, this is Hamish Downey, Director of Matcha and Vanilla, and today I want to talk to you about two of my passions, Japan and the Golden Age Hollywood films. Okay, so if you've seen the title, you've clicked on it, I'm sure you realise that I'm comparing and doing a little rant about the Age of Chivalry. So first I'm comparing. Okay, so let's start with the Golden Age. So Jezebel is, well, it's basically, its reputation is, it's the film that they made to try and get ahead of Gone with the Wind, to capitalise on the interest of Gone with the Wind, which was released the following year. It stars Bette Davis, who was initially up for playing Scarlett O'Hara, but ended up saying no because her studio wanted to loan her out with Errol Flynn, and she didn't think Errol Flynn would play a particularly good Rhett Butler, and I agree. But I will say, on a side note, I think Errol Flynn might have been very good as Scarlett's kind of other love interest, not the Rhett Butler character, but the guy that she's always wanting to go after. Okay, but anyway, aside from that, let's go back to Jezebel. Now, we've all just been through a pandemic, and this film has the backdrop of the yellow fever epidemic. So now I know we're not, try to look at a film as a film by itself, but we live in a world, you never watch a film in a vacuum, so it's hard not to see the parallels. Now obviously there is a similarity with the love triangle of the Bette Davis character, who's this strong-willed woman, and she has to decide between the Henry Fonda character and I think his name is George Brent, the other character, and it has it has an interesting conclusion. Maybe I don't know if it's a happier one than Gone with the Wind, but anyway, it sort of covers that feeling. And what I would recommend about it is that, number one, before I talk about the Age of Chivalry, for all of us who have just gone through the pandemic, I think it's very interesting, the feel of it in the background. Like the foreground is this love triangle, but the background is this, the looming yellow fever pandemic. So, okay, so there's that. Now I want to compare it to not the Keanu Reeves movie, but the story of the 47 Ronin. Now, to give you a bit of a background, now it started off, obviously it's a true story, which was then adapted into this Bunraku play, which is a traditional Japanese puppet theatre. It's actually, I loved it. I just saw it very recently, and it made me think, I want to make this video. So the story is like, if you've watched the Keanu Reeves movie, maybe kind of the end part, you may not know how it all happened. So here is the summary of this kind of very bold and the beautiful story. And that's where it will lead into this Age of Chivalry I want to talk about. We've got this sort of feudal lord and this kind of lower level noble man. He's not as high level, but he's in the floating world of the Edo period, right? And he has a beautiful wife, and this feudal lord makes a pass at literally tries to pass a love letter to this fellow's wife. Now, okay, so backtrack a little bit. Japan in the olden days was a little bit not 100% monogamous, so maybe that's needed for the background of this story, right? So anyway, so she, as she probably has to do many times, accidentally on purpose drops the letter and continues on her merry way. And then now there is this another kind of nobleman who seems to know both of them, right? So he rushes to the feudal lord to make sure that he will apologize to this fellow, like humble himself to apologize to this fellow. And he gets very annoyed because this is this, he calls him at one point like a pond fish who swims around in the mud water thinking he's in heaven, and then one day being released into the river and not knowing what to do, eventually crashing into the riverbank wall and dying. So he's not a particularly nice guy. Okay, all right. So anyway, so he does. This middleman gets the big guy, to the head honcho, to humble himself to the other fellow, and it sort of works until the wife sends him an official rejection letter, at which point he then... The thing is, this is where the Age of Chivalry comes into effect, because... and this is what happens in Jezebel as well. So in Jezebel... Bette Davis wears this red dress to the debutante ball, which of course means, she's had relations, in the biblical sense with a man before, so everyone's scandalized. And then I think Henry Fonda does something, and then George Brent, not Henry Fonda, but in any case, that George Brent ended up having to defend Betty's honour. So, with this Age of Chivalry, right? And this is a bit of a spoiler, but he doesn't survive, and it's and then Betty's character does become rejected, essentially. If we think like, it's so romantic, the Age of Chivalry, shouldn't we bring the Age of Chivalry back? I don't think we should. And so it basically ruins everyone's life. And so in Japan, right, so basically what happens is, so he gets this rejection letter, he then gets offended, and the husband is forced to defend his wife's honor, and he challenges the fellow to a battle inside this feudal lord's house, which means if he loses, he has to ritualistically off himself, let's say. The stakes are pretty high, and if he does that, that means his wealth is redistributed, and the retain. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself, but basically, he does challenge this guy. He's like, hey, and so I was talking to the friend of mine who I watched this play with, and he was saying like, well, they have this idea of like, well, you have to stand up for your principles, even if it means, the very worst. Because I remember thinking, like, what is the moral of this story? I mean, because obviously what happens is that he has to off himself, and then his retainers have become Ronin, like they no longer have a master. And then, so they then regroup, and they kill the feudal lord, and then because they've killed him in his house, they all have to off themselves. Like, it's just, all over a letter. But then you sort of think, well, what's the moral story here? Like, is it, this feudal lord who thinks he can do whatever he wants, should act like more of a gentleman? I mean, of course, that's one element. But then if this happens, you've got to defend your wife. But then it's just, I think I just want to say I'm glad this time is over, because it's just, like, if you look at these two stories, it's just a world of pain. Like,